Okay, dear boys and girls and friends, and Mr. Floyd Lemon, examples, contemporary examples of Jesus of Nazareth being exceptionally omnipresent and active. Now, there's pretty amazing stuff all over the web now. It's pretty easy to find ordinary people talking about direct supernatural miracles that have happened by the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is really important. The three primary gifts of Jesus are the Holy Spirit and power, and the brand new covenant teachings of Yeshua, many of which have been forgotten, and sent ones, human beings who are actually going forth with the support of the Jesus teaching and the supernatural power. So, Holy Spirit and power and the teachings. If you read 2 John, verse 8 to 11, it says, if you rush ahead doing salvations and running a ministry, if you rush ahead and do not bring all the detailed teachings of Christ, then you don't have God and you're doing a wicked work. And I see that you're interacting with plenty of people who actually don't work with the Holy Spirit as, in a way that you can actually discuss and point out what the Holy Spirit is doing. In Acts chapter 15, they had this big problem with the circumcision, and a group of people got together and they got an answer collectively from the Holy Spirit. Give the Gentiles the covenant of Noah. Don't eat the meat with blood in it. Don't eat the meat of a strangled animal. Don't eat a meat sacrificed to idol. And don't mess with the marriage bed. But I ask you personally, Floyd, you have some life goals, some things that you want to get done. You have some personal problems, things that you're weak at, and, recurring errors. Do you have a small group of people, a cluster of 2 or 3 family men with their families, and some people walking single like Jesus, to get together with and admit your faults with every time you get together? Do you realize that for the first 300 years of the church, the most important thing was admitting fault before baptism, admitting fault before prayer, admitting fault before worship, admitting fault before communion? And communion happens behind closed doors with no visitors and only people that are willing to die for Christ or be tortured for Christ right now today. So communion is the new Holy of Holies. So after we admit our faults, we take communion in a group of people, and then we begin asking the Holy Spirit specific things about relationship and business and et cetera, et cetera. And I've never had that in a regular way in my life, and that is ordinary Christianity. So one of the reasons why I think it's fascinating, and Mr. Floyd, you make me smile, is you have, at least partly as a negative and combative attitude towards Christianity people, but you tend to look like you're standing in Christianity and declaring yourself as a wise person, which is kind of cool. But there's tons of information and tons of examples of the Holy Spirit stuff actually operating. And it's really dumb to get anywhere near Christianity without wanting what Jesus says is the better thing. Most of the Christians that I interact with are not thrilled about Yeshua saying, it's better that I go away, because if I don't go away, the Comforter, the Advocate, the alongside one, the Paraclete will not come. And so I'm surrounded by a Christianity that didn't care about the Holy Spirit and largely is against the Holy Spirit and is largely against people who operate in the Holy Spirit, and they push away from the people who operate in the Spirit and call them weird and strange and, sketchy and what have you. Also, make a mark on your mind and heart. And remember that Rav Shaul, Rabbi Saul, was the most humble apostle because he killed a bunch of people. He had killed the nice little people that were carrying the truth of heaven. Imagine living your life with that experience, knowing that you actually ended lineages of people that might be refreshing the world. So, um, I've heard in your commentaries, or I've seen in your commentaries, these rough comments about people, quote unquote, supporting Paul. And the fun thing about Paul is he, a rabbi, a rabbi is a learner. And when he was aware that Yeshua was God, the logical thing for him to do would be to run to the feet of the 12 apostles and say, brothers, what must I learn? What is the tradition? But instead, he was sent by the Holy Spirit out into La La Land, out into the Arabian town, desert towns, which is not where a Jew guy, rabbi guy would go. And for 3 years, he learned the program directly through the Holy Spirit, Jesus in person, to him. And then he sneaked into Jerusalem to talk to only Peter and James. And they were like, wow, every detail that you got out in the desert towns of Arabia, every detail is exactly what we learned from him in person. So if there's anything that Paul says or mentions, it is exactly the same as what the 12 were taught in person. And that was an amazement to all of them. And then during the Jerusalem Council, he goes back to Jerusalem and he says to Peter, listen, Peter, Mr. Rock, hotshot, Jesus selected guy, you know, you're a Jew, you don't even act like a Jew. Now you're forcing Gentiles to have their penis skin cut when that is not part of salvation. That's a thing that you can do if you're focused on, you know, appreciating the law, but it does not save you, and it is not a requirement for Gentiles. So Rav Shaul comes in and actually has to remind the commercial fisherman. I mean, that guy, Paul, was a scribe. He was a super Jew. He was a studied up person. And Jesus was a super Jew because he's God. And then Paul was a super Jew. And the other guys were more like working stiffs. So it's really interesting that Yeshua selects this guy. Judas is dead. And then all of a sudden this other guy comes up out of nowhere, selected just by Yeshua, which is just genius, man. I mean, you can't make up something that beautiful. Anyway, all the best to you, Floyd. May the peace and shalom of Yehoshua come upon you and your family. Oh, and my personal miracle things, man, me and two other happy guys were praying over this lady who had a young woman who had an enormous amount of cancer in her. They were doing injections. They didn't think she was going to live. We were singing songs over her and saying, Spirit of cancer, bye-bye, go away, yippee, come on, Holy Spirit. The next time she went to get her cancer injected, the doctor said, what have you been doing lately? And she said, what are you talking about? Come on, just do this. I hate it. And the tech comes out of the booth and he's like, no, you don't understand. I can't treat something that's not there. Here's the scan from 2 weeks ago, and here's the scan from now. It's like your cancer has been supernaturally removed without a scar. And she was like, oh my gosh, it was those guys. They were singing. We were all laughing and crying at the same time. And so, you know, I mean, I've seen some pretty amazing miracles. I discerned a sleep disorder spirit that was on a friend of ours from youth, and she was just talking about this sleep disorder that she had, and I was embarrassed because wasn't a Christianity kind of person, and I'm really uptight with prayers and Christianity people. When somebody doesn't know Christianity, I don't like to use a lot of jargon. And this girl told this story, and I said, listen, I feel like there was a spirit that attached to you because of something that happened to you when you were little. And can I just pray a tiny little prayer? And I prayed a little prayer. She came back 2 months later and she's like, hey, you guys, my sleep miracle is still sticking. My whole family is so amazed that I can just fall asleep when I need to. And a couple of times I prayed for people and their high blood pressure went down. And, and back in 1994, I started walking around in parks with some friends of mine and asking people, has anything supernatural ever happened to you? And we got so many stories of like, children dying in the hospital and they're dead, and there's two people with their faces on the floor praying, and the child comes back to life, and like all kinds of different stories and amazing things. So, Yeshua of Nazareth is definitely active, and Christianity is a big problem because people get caught up in their favorite corner of Christianity, and they've got their hand on one point of doctrine, and they like to fight other people and say, oh, well, those people don't have the right doctrine on baptism, so don't go anywhere near them. They're bad, they're weird, they're... And it's literally satanic. It's Hasatan means adversarial. So people end up getting all hooked up in, oh, we have a true life of righteousness. Well, forget about that Holy Spirit stuff. And, oh, we do this and we do that, and we have the proper Torah and Tanakh approach to Yeshua, or, we have the Orthodox understanding of the order of prayer and the proper way to handle the Eucharist. And I mean, people get all caught up in little segments of the good news, and it's not smart to do that. You got to put all the little parts together and make it beautiful in the home in a cluster of families. So Floyd, wherever you're having difficulties or wherever you need breakthrough, I bet you're the courageous kind of guy who could actually form an honesty and communion group that would invite the Holy Spirit, and some wild stuff would happen. And you can send out an outreach team every day from your communion group cluster of 2 or 3 families. And the kids say, Mama, Papa, can I go out on the miracle team tomorrow, please? Because the Holy Spirit is very active, but human beings are just selfish and prideful, and they get all caught up in their little club and clique. So anyhow, I hope some of these things have been a semi-inspiration to you. Please check out my Grandpa Honesty Guide playlists, especially Uncomfortable Truths About World Control and C19 Wisdom and California Fires. Those are some of the most shocking, world event things that are going on. I mean, the world juggernaut is beginning to show its hand and what it has been doing for a long time, which makes us even more hungry for faith in the invisible God. So peace be with you. All the best.